I'd like to now introduce Clare MacFarlane from Pitter Patter Physiotherapy. Clare's a paediatric physio and would like to talk today with you about intensive therapy for children and babies with SMA.
All right, hi everyone. Yes, I am Clare. It is nice to meet you all. It's nice to be here. Thank you for the invite. So who's the physio? That's me a few years ago. I've had 11 years in paediatric physio experience in both Sydney and up here in Queensland. I've got level 2 CME. If you don't know what that is, I can talk about that at a later stage. I also mentor other therapists and other therapy clinics as well. My most recent significant experience was director of rehab at Napa in Sydney. So I was there for 3 years. I brought it over from the US and left in 2018 when I moved up here to the Sunshine Coast and started my family and started my Pitter Patter physio clinic. And since I've been up here, the last 3 years, I've treated about 7 kiddos with SMA in both an intensive and a weekly setting. So a little bit of recent experience with these guys. So today I kind of been thinking about what I want to speak about, and I guess the main part that I sort of work on is confidence. So that's the overarching theme for my discussion today. And that I'm going to talk about alignment, head and body control, catching and saving, movement therapy, communication discussion, and then some parents' feedback that I found was quite interesting, and just a little basic summary of what we've discussed. So, alignment. What is it? So you can see the two pictures here. The guy on the left has got his feet are wonky, the knees are out, throws the pelvis out, the trunk and the shoulders, and then the head has to compensate. And the guy on the right has got nice alignment. Everything seems straight and balanced and on top of each other. So the body needs the alignment for proper growth, for posture, for proprioception, and for balance. So when all these segments align in an anatomically correct position, you get that beautiful feedback to the brain and to the body. So ideally, we want to have the feet aligned. So that can be done. I'll show you in the next slide with orthoses. The feet, the knees stacking on top of that, and the hips are stacking on top of that, and then the trunk is able to balance in the pelvis. The shoulders are able then to balance the head on top of that. If one segment's out, you can imagine, as you see the guy on the left, it's going to throw the rest of the body out. Everything has to compensate. So with your alignment, it helps growth in the right direction. So if you're constantly to the side, that's kind of where you go. That's the way the body's designed. It grows in the direction of force. So if we can get nice alignment, it's going to help the body grow in the right direction, which then helps the muscles control the body in the right way. It's going to give beautiful feedback and proprioception to the brain and to the body, and then obviously that's going to help with balance. So you've got two different ways of alignment. You've got the extrinsic and intrinsic feedback. So here we've got some images of some extrinsic body or external body supports. So you've got your lovely TLSOs, some second skins and theratogs. There's also ways of this in your seating, your equipment, transport, handling during therapy, and also play. So getting them support through that. Lower limb orthoses, and definitely shoes. Big fan. Those of you who know me, big fan of shoes. And also the intrinsic feedback to get the alignment is through strengthening, stretching, and visual verbal feedback for the child to help them. So tilting your head to the middle or try and lift your shoulders down, whatever it might be that's relevant. So I've got a beautiful little kiddo here, just a nice example of some external support in therapy that we worked on. So you can see here, the right side, you can see here the image on the left shows the kyphoscoliosis, which is her usual resting position in sitting. Her arms are propped, so she's holding herself balanced with her hands. Her head's tilted back. She's quite slouched through that trunk and chest, and she has that significant curve. And then on the image on the right, you can see, I've got the theratogs on the outside, so you can see what's going on here. You can see that her hands are up. So that tells me that she's a little bit more confident in what her body's doing. She doesn't need to be splinting herself. You can see her trunk's extended. We've slightly reduced the curve in her trunk, and her chin's a bit more straight. So it's not perfect. I'm not saying this is the be all and end all, but this is an example of how you can just slightly correct the body with a little bit of an external support in a therapy setting. excuse me. This is her in standing. You can see my face on the first image. I don't love the standing, and that's what it gives you a bit of an idea. So there's uneven weight bearing on her feet here. So you can see that left knee's bent and her hips are swaying to the side, and her trunk's also swayed, and then she's got her arm out wide trying to counterbalance her body. So we talked about that in the alignment. The body wants to try and stay straight and balanced, and this is what she's having to do to compensate. On the other side, I'm able to hold her a lot lower because her body's in alignment. So she's getting that proprioception, the balance and the alignment. Her feet are even, the knees are straighter, her hips are not swaying to the side. And we can't tell, but her arm is actually less far out and her head is slightly straighter as well. So that's some importance about the alignment. So the other thing I want to talk about is head control. So we know the importance of alignment to work on confidence and to help these guys progress in physical health. And then the next one I want to talk about is head control. So I've noticed all my kiddos, or most of the younger ones I had, have got really weak head and neck control. I know this may not be relevant for everybody, but I'm sort of giving like the most severe cases here. So it's understandable that they have a lot of fear about movement and their head control due to lack of trust in their body. Excuse me. They all tend to have that same look of fear or apprehension whenever we try and change their body out of their supported state. So because they haven't been able to rely on their body, of course they're going to have that fear. So what we want to try and do is create that control about the head and neck so we can increase their confidence and not be fearful about movement and balance and stuff. Where the head goes, the body's going to follow. So if we can control it, then it's going to help a little bit with the body as well. If we can help them increase their confidence with their neck control, we can increase their ability to learn how to compensate with the body and to control that lack of head control as well. Talk about that in the next slide. All right. Catching and saving. So again, going back to creating confidence in the child and their body, catching and saving is quite important. So we talked about head control, being able to control their head and catch their head. The next thing we want to talk about is catching and saving with their body as well. So what I work on is being able to save their fall or loss of balance in all different positions. So whether it's in sitting, in kneeling, or in supported stand, all my kiddos that I've worked with, especially this little one, has had some really lovely head drop, body goes down and we catch and we save ourselves. And you can see in this picture here, this is an example of her head. You can see the picture's blurry. So she's actually on her way down. She was supporting herself propping. Head was going, she bent her elbows, she got her chest down, and then the head went down. So that's like a perfect example of teaching her that just how do we fall safely. And she was okay. She didn't get upset. She didn't hurt herself. It's a very padded bench, which is good. So yes, ideally we want to do the head control first. And if we can't get head control, but we're working on other parts of the body, we want to get that compensation with the hands or the trunk, so that catching response. The hands and catching response. So if they're sitting and if they're heading forward, we want to try and get those arms out to catch them, to protect. If they're not catching and stopping their body, they're slowing their body down. So they're saving themselves a bit from that fall. Lowering themselves safely. So again, tipping to the side, being able to put your hand out to the side and knowing to tuck your chin out of the way so you don't smash your face is another beautiful, safe thing. And that's going to create, again, that confidence in their body and in movement and trying different things. Going backwards is another big one. Dropping the head back, and a lot of the kids either compensate with chin forward and chest, so they're balancing in this center point. But as soon as you start getting that chin tucked, the trunk wants to go backwards, and then that opens yourself up to falling backwards. So if we can't catch yourself by putting hands backwards, what we want to do is go, okay, you're falling backwards. Can you tuck your chin and roll your shoulders to the side so that you're not falling on the back of your head? You can maybe get your hand out and things like that. So one of the big things, again, creating that confidence by teaching a safe catching and saving yourself in a way that's not going to make a movement scary. Oh yeah, another big point on this is scary for the parents, is letting them fall, by letting them fall in a safe way. Okay, so I know this is counterintuitive to you as a parent and definitely a lot of therapists, but if you're constantly catching the child and not allowing that experience of falling and knowing how to save themselves, you're kind of taking away that opportunity to learn. So I'm not saying let them fall onto concrete floor. I'm saying doing it in a way that's safe and in a way that it teaches them in small increments. So just grab my doll. For example, say your child is standing up and the head's going down. You can catch them halfway and then help them lower. If your child's sitting and they're tipping, instead of just letting them fall straight to the side, you can help them put their arm out and then slowly lower the head so they understand the movement and direction that they're going in. Okay, does that make sense? You want them to fall, but teaching them in a safe way. More practice that they do, the more confidence they're going to have, more confidence you're going to have as well in them and their ability to catch themselves. You can do it in a fun way as well. There's lots of fun games of falling, obviously safely. Fun and safe falling. All right, movement, my favourite thing. So what we want to do, what I try to do as a therapist and education is you want to keep the body moving in all opportunities, okay? So it's important in confidence for both the child and the parent, as we've just discussed. Keeping on that, it can be a little bit stressful for you as a parent if you have that expectation of the child performing an hour of therapy per day at home that you're responsible for. So to take the pressure off, simplifying it, you want to include movement challenges in all parts of your day. So, for example, rolling onto your tummy when they wake up in the morning and then helping them slide out of bed, placing the feet on the ground, and they can push themselves up into a supported stand with however much support's needed. So that becomes part of the routine, and it's not, A, it's better on your back. B, they're getting that opportunity to practice a roll, to practice pushing, to practice lifting themselves up, to practice standing, and things like that. So it's all incidental functional movement, which is fantastic. If that's not something you can do, or it doesn't work for you, you can try things like doing a transition up to sit after every nappy change. So working on the arms and the head control and pushing. You can work on sit to stands between toileting. So things like that you can include in everyday activity. That's just normal things that you do with them, but then they start doing it a bit more for themselves. So doing that throughout the day, not only are they learning how to do it, but you're also learning as well. They're creating that strength opportunity and creating that independence, and you're also gaining confidence to know that, okay, yep, they're learning these things that are going to help them through life, but it also takes the pressure off you having to do therapy throughout the day. So as we talk about, movement does create strength, and alternatively, another way of thinking, it prevents muscle wastage. And obviously we know why that's important in these guys. Movement provides input into the body. So this goes back through that alignment. So you need the input to provide the proprioception, which allows the body to feel what's the right way, or to feel its muscles in the right way on how to do movement and strengthening. And then recovery, also quite important to enhance any progress that they make. Obviously you don't want to fatigue these guys too much, but keeping the challenging little activities in throughout the day. The next point that I find is really important in creating confidence for everyone is focusing on the functional movement. So how is your child going to roll? Are they going to roll with their arm up? Are they going to roll with their arm down, tucked out of the way? Are they going to move their leg first? Are they going to move their head first? Like, how are they going to roll? There's the typical way that therapists want you to roll in a perfect sense. Sometimes that kind of goes out of the window, and we want to just get that functional movement. These guys are clever. They want to move. They don't want to just be laying around and trying to practice something that may be really, really, really hard. So let's find the easy way to do something functional. For example, crawling. Are they going to crawl on hands and knees? Are they going to belly crawl? Or are they going to bottom shuffle? Happy to sit and got the confidence now in balance. You're getting to explore your environment. does it have to be crawling? Can you do it in another way? Another way would be the Firefly scoop or some other little type of equipment that's going to help them move. So what's going to be the best way for your child to move around? Something we focus on in therapy and also home exercise programs as well. It's a really good question, and it's definitely something therapists like to argue, focusing on the right movement or focusing on any functional movement. So case by case, it's dependent. I'm definitely a big fan of, if they're ready to move and they want to move, let's get them moving somehow, and we can work on correction into different techniques. But I feel like their own confidence in the next point, so the independence with the movement creates the confidence in movement. So if they've got that confidence in moving somehow, whether it's rolling around, whether it's bottom scooting, whether it's belly crawling, they're going to want to move more. And this is obviously super important movement. All right, leads me into physio. So a lot of this stuff is my experience. So other therapists will have different ideas on the best way forward. But what I'm sharing with you now is my experience over the last 11 years, but mainly the last 3 and 7. So as mentioned, yes, I'm a big fan of intensive therapy. I provide intensive therapy programs here. Well, I will at the end of the year once we have this baby. I tend to do 3-week blocks of therapy, but they can be done in 1 to 2 blocks of 1 to 2 week blocks, but ideally it's a 3-week block. So the reason that we do this is creates the strength, but also the neuroplasticity. And again, when we're working through things like confidence and strengthening, you need to have that repetition and that exposure to it. 2 or more per year is ideal. 4 is fantastic. More is amazing, obviously funding dependent. And then here again, I also provide weekly therapy. I know some clinics only do it once a fortnight, once a month, once a week. I highly recommend, if you can, trying to get twice a week physiotherapy, plus any home incidental therapy or home exercise programs. The reason is, I know a lot of therapists or even funding suppliers don't love the idea of intensives because some people may think that they're a waste of time. But one of my favourite analogies is, if you want to get stronger, if you want to learn a language, when you're going to school, or if you're on a diet, do you do that once a week, or do you do that as many times as you can a week? Where are you going to see the changes? If I dieted once a week, that would be great, but I will never get anywhere. If I went to the gym once a week, it's not going to do much. It maybe maintains fitness, maybe, if you're active otherwise, but it's not going to make any major changes. So having those blocks of intensive therapy gives that boost of input, strengthening, alignment, skill set, gaining skills, milestones, setting up for the next milestone, whatever it might be. Whereas the weekly, interspersed with the intensive, provides that opportunity for the therapist, whether it's the one you do intensive with or another therapist, to monitor how they're progressing, maintaining the skills that they've gained, so it's not a loss of skill, creating the pathways for the new or the next step or milestone or strength or goal, whatever it might be, as well as being able to monitor your home program, because you might have been given something at the end of your intensive, and 2 months later you might be like, hang on a second, we're nailing it, what's next? So that's something your therapist that you see twice weekly can help progress on. The things that I provide here, or the ones that I've found to work really well with kiddos with SMA, is mainly the CME. Again, we can talk about that if anyone wants to ask any questions. But basically, it's a form of therapy where you put the child into positions or through movements that elicit an automatic postural response. So you give them the least amount of support possible for them to be successful at the activity or the movement that you're trying. Excuse me. These are quite fantastic because the child doesn't have to actively participate, in as much as it's the body's automatic response. So it intrinsically wants to do this movement. So it's kind of cool in that respect. And functional physio. So bottom shuffling is not a CME exercise, but it's something that I will teach if need be, or other types of movements. Hydrotherapy I've seen has been fantastic for kiddos with SMA because of the support and the input and the proprioception that's given. And the other tip that I would provide for families, so I know a lot of people maybe can't access these types of therapies where they are, where they're rural or regional. So trying to find someone who can provide some outside the box thinking. So maybe you do get to see a therapist when you go and see a multidisciplinary team in a city or wherever else. You can get some ideas and get some exercises, but you want someone who can, excuse me, have some outside the box thinking. What are you trying to work for? What's your goal? What's your next milestone you're working towards? And how are you going to get there? Is it going to be the typical traditional trajectory? Or do you going to need to try and think of something different? Okay, well, this exercise isn't working. What else can we try that works on the same muscles and the same movement to get the same response, but maybe slightly different? So finding someone that can think outside the box when you're hitting some brick walls is fantastic. Problem solving, that's what you want. And then having a home program. So whether that's from an intensive setting or from if you can only access therapy once a week, making sure that you do have a solid home program that you're happy to keep working with at home and having those regular check-ins. So that's sort of my experience with physio with these kiddos. Next couple of slides, I'm just going to show you some images and videos of some changes that we've seen between intensives, between years, like goals and in an intensive. So this little one here. So the first image is some knee walking that we practice. So this one works on head control, trunk control, core balance and strength. And we were practicing knee walking here. So I'm helping her shift her weight and I'm actually helping initiate those knees to step. So when I'm pretty sure this is like the first intensive I saw her, I had to hold up at her waist, just at her ribs basically. And I was supporting quite high up at her glutes and really having to move her legs. You can see in the next image, same year, I think this might have been the last one we did last year. I only have to support at her hips now and still helping with weight shift, but she's initiating the movements. She's holding her trunk and she's able to control her body. So in a year or less than a year, definitely less than a year, she's created so much strength with her intensives, her weekly and her home therapy programs, which is pretty huge. These next ones, I've got some videos, hopefully they work, yes. So the first one is April last year, we're practicing rolling. So this is a type of rolling technique that I teach parents for the home program. Don't need to hear anything. So this is me showing the mum how to do these exercises at home. So you can see I'm giving a fair amount of support at her legs to cue her body to roll and to move. So this is a CME rolling exercise. You can see she didn't lift her head. She really struggled with, I'll just play that one again. She really struggled with lifting her head over. It was a lot of hard work for her. You can see in the mirror her arms are sort of stuck under her face and it's kind of where she's ended up. She's not really moving her arms too much independently, apart from that last part of the rollover. Okay, so in the next video, this is her rolling at home. So she's been practicing by herself with a therapist in intensives. Look at that arm movement. She's rolling herself around, she's clearing her face, and she's moving herself independently. Look at that beautiful roll. So, I mean, rolling, that's a massive skill. She's now moving independently on the floor by herself in less than a year. So the confidence in movement, the practicing the movement, the doing the incidental therapy, the doing intensive has paid off for them. And then that one. Okay, and now this one is same little one. This was at the end of last year, October, November, in the same intensive. So the first video, she's practicing bottom scooting. So we're really wanting to get some independent movement. We're not going to get crawling independently in 3 weeks, but how are we going to get her going? So the first video, I've got her on a decline ramp or elevated ramp, however way. It's got maybe about this much lift underneath it. She's on organza, which takes out some friction, and we're practicing bottom scooting. This one was the first ones.
Mummy.
She did. Mum needed to help with getting some of that rotation going in her hip. You can see her hands are on her legs. She's very stiff and very concerned about this movement. She's doing it, but she's not a big fan of it and not very confident. Took her a very long time to get from the top to the bottom, and but was starting to get the movements. By the end of the intensive, she's actually on a flat panel here, so there's no gravity assist. You can see her hands are by her side, her head's moving everywhere, her trunk's moving, she's tilting her hips, she's wiggling her legs. And what this video didn't show is actually she was heading towards us, but she pivoted and headed towards mum. So in a 3-week intensive, she was able to go from scared, nervous, needing assistance going down a gravity-assisted ramp to bottom shuffling on a flat bit of wood, changing directions and increasing all of her movement. So that gives you a bit of an idea of why I kind of like to do a bit of the functional stuff, as well as a lot of the alignment and typical proper movement, because you get changes like this in 3 weeks, and that's huge. All right. Next thing I want to chat about is, again, this is going to about keeping under that overarching theme of communication and discussion, to do with confidence, is with your child and with other parents. So chatting to your child about movement and about alignment and about what you're doing and why it's important. So, why do we want to move? Why is it important? We want to be able to roll or have fun.
You need to diarise, please.
Sorry? Sorry? Sorry, I've gone. Oops. So having communication with your child about this movement and why it's important. We want to talk about the strengthening. We want to talk about getting the next set of skills. We want to talk about body alignment and how that's important for them and what they want to do with their life and what's going to make them feel healthy and strong and confident. Communicating again about that safe falling and why that's important and how you're going to help them and how it's okay to fall. Guiding them through that falling process is, verbally guiding them through as well as physically guiding them through is important. And especially coming from the parent. It's great coming from a therapist, but it's very important also coming from a parent in a home setting. And then providing that feedback, that's also kind of a way of communicating because it's showing them what they're feeling inside their body and what they're seeing and how do they match up or what needs changing. So they might feel like they're balanced and they're doing something fun, but when you get them in front of a mirror or a photo to see that they can physically straighten themselves up and start to understand that alignment. And then discussion with other parents. So what's worked for them? What have they found? What have they found to help them with their child? Medication, equipment, therapy, resources, what's been working, having that discussion. Where have they found therapy? Someone may have heard about something from someone's aunt's, uncle's, brother's, sister's friend, and that worked for them. They were able to find this person or that type of therapy, that input. Figuring out the type that works best for you, the type of therapy. I've talked about intensive and weekly, but maybe you're finding a different type of therapy works well for your child, or maybe you've never heard of intensive therapy before, or CME, or NeuroSoothe, or TheraSoothe, or whatever it is that you might be able to have these discussions around. And then also discussing how often. You've got to be reasonable with school, other kids, with funding, location, all those types of things. Having that chat with parents who are on a similar page to you can help, maybe feel a bit more comfortable or confident about your choices making with therapy and how often you're able to do this for your child. So I'm big about communicating with your therapist and with other parents and obviously with the child. Big fan. So some of the feedback I've got from a couple of my parents is just brief. There's a lot of words on there. Have a read through. But a lot of it goes to these points that I've just shared. Knowing about intensives earlier, that there's different types of intensive and not just your standard home physio. So that that goes into intensive CME, functional, whatever. So I do push the parents and I do push the child to a point of ability, not, I don't put a ceiling on the child. I don't see where there's a point of that, because that gives nothing to anybody. Yeah, so they said call it tough love, but it's definitely been a blessing. Bracing, so we're talking about alignment here. Some parents have found that maybe they could have done something about the alignment earlier, but we're going under doctor's directions, and maybe they could have prevented or reduced the severity of malalignment. So that's something else that I've had feedback on. Again, there's definitely reasons why doctors will focus on the medical side of things and therapists focus on the therapy side of things. So getting that guidance from other parents who've been in the same situation as you, or getting some information on therapy is probably a good resource. And yes, definitely cautioning against pushing a child too hard for obvious reasons, but knowing that limit between pushing them to get where they need to go and pushing them too hard that's going to cause damage. So finding someone who has that understanding and that knowledge or that experience is also quite a good point. And yes, word of mouth, again, communicating with your families about therapists, therapy approaches. And yeah, I think that's important, stay in communication. And then, yes, integrating your therapy, as I've mentioned before, incidental stuff throughout the day is so important, making it fun, making it part of normal life so it doesn't feel like therapy is huge, especially when it's scary. Therapy can be full on, can be boring, can be tiring, can be scary. So incidental stuff is fantastic throughout the day at home. And then I had really nice feedback saying my belief, so the belief of your therapist in your child being able to achieve these things really helps child's confidence and the parent's confidence in what they're able to do. So yeah, having someone that pushes and supports you, obviously within reason, and doesn't put a ceiling on your child is, I think, very important for both you and your child, but also working on the child's health in the long term and confidence. Anyway. Let's go to, okay, so alignment, head and body control, safe catching and falling, movement and physio, and communication and discussion. That's kind of my little bundle of confidence there for you guys.
Thanks, Claire, for sharing your invaluable experience. We have a few questions that have come through on the chat. Firstly, we hear a lot about neuroplasticity, particularly in children up to the age of 8.
Mm-hmm.
Is that relevant to SMA? And should we push back on NDIS when they use that as an excuse to drop funding for intensives for older children with SMA?
Yes, I'm a big fan of pushback. The reason is, if they want to talk about neuroplasticity, you can look into the older generations or older people who have spinal cord injuries, brain injuries, and they are able to regain skills or create skills, and they've had a brain injury and they're older. So there is a theory set that at 8 you don't get to improve anymore, but you still can. Kids are still developing skills from 8 till the rest of your life. So you can still, it's just not as fast. So definitely push back. Definitely.
Thank you. And then lastly, what sort of tips can you give us to help with children that get over the physiotherapy or the intensive or even just weekly sessions? What tips you can help with those children?
Look, there's nothing wrong with having a break, as long as you continue that incidental stuff at home. I feel like every kid gets over it. Sometimes it needs to be a change of therapist. There's definitely a couple of kiddos here that need to have a different input, different face, different location to keep it interesting. So if that's feasible, then that's a great idea. Changing the type of therapy that's done. So maybe instead of doing your typical physio, that's at the therapy clinic or at home, you try hydro, or you try a sport, or you try like a hippotherapy or some other type of activity that can still be beneficial in strengthening and movement. And you maybe try that for a month or 2 months and then start creeping your other therapy back in. And unfortunately, sometimes you do just have to push through. And if it's not a right fit with your clinic or your current therapist at that time, try the change for an intensive and see what other people might be able to provide, and see if your child maybe is ready to change. What's the word? You know, when you change every year in school, you get a new teacher, you get different input. So maybe something like that could work for your child as well.
Thank you. And finally, how do you assess how much PT a child should be doing in an intensive or in a weekly session or weekly?
Intensive wise, it's all individual. It's not a blanket prescription. I tend to look at the child's age, their current ability, what other comorbidity stuff's going on, and also what their goals are, where they're at physically and what they're wanting to achieve. So, for example, some of the bigger kids I see that are maybe 3 or 5 can definitely do 2 hours, but I'll always split the hours to give them that break and that recovery. Sometimes if they're quite physically able, I'll put the 2 hours together and I'll do the hardest one first and the easiest one second. Some of the littler kiddos, it's just 1 hour a day. And then we split between what they're, you get your fatigue, you get your muscle soreness, you get over it in a few days. So then we sort of just manage it in the session. Maybe we do 75% of the exercises instead of 100. So it needs to be really case by case and really you need to have that feedback constantly throughout the sessions. Weekly wise, I definitely don't see anything wrong with an hour of therapy, again, as long as they're taking into account all of those things I just discussed. So maybe it's a day where it's Friday afternoon, they've had a week at school, maybe they're only going to get through 75% or 50%, and that's okay. So I think it's really, case by case kind of situation. I don't know if that helps.
No, that's great. Thanks, Claire.
No
And
worries.
just a couple more that are coming through now.
Yeah.
So in regards to funding and the use of funding, what would you advise is better, an intensive or weekly, so as to ensure that maintenance and the AT prescription is maintained?
I like to push the envelope. So my advice for families that I've had come through who are able to do intensives, and I'm talking about able to do intensives with timelines. So you're able to get, if you're not at school yet, being able to attend intensives regularly. Push for 4 intensives a year, if not 6. If you can get to see a physio twice a week, plus your OT, plus speech, whatever else, the things that I've noticed or that we've worked through with some families is booking in what you want, booking in what your therapist is recommending and what you think is going to be best for your child, working through the funding and then having appeals. A lot of families have had success with that, especially the under 5s, because A, they don't get a lot of funding to start with, and B, this is the stuff that's helping them progress so that they maybe don't need as much therapy, funding, support later on in life. So that's the biggest part, I guess, parents have found is we're doing this now so we don't need to spend a lot of money later. Does that sort of answer that question, hopefully?
That's
Okay.
great. Thank you. I think that covers all of our questions today. So thank you so much for allowing your time, sharing your experience. It's definitely been great for anyone online. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.